It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky looks heavy and low, pressing down as if it wanted to touch everything on the ground. The city streets were crowded with people rushing under umbrellas, some running to catch buses, some huddled under shop canopies, trying to escape the sudden downpour. Among them, one person was walking slowly, not in a hurry, enjoying the way the rain made everything smell fresh. Their coat was slightly soaked at the edges, and hair clung softly to the forehead. They were used to rain, found a strange comfort in it, and somehow, today, it felt like a small adventure. Nearby, under the same patch of weak shelter outside a small coffee shop, another person was standing, shaking slightly from the cold and holding a cup of hot tea tightly between both hands. The warmth was comforting, but it didn't hide the nervousness in their eyes. They had been waiting for a friend who had just canceled, leaving them awkwardly alone in the sudden crowd of strangers. The rain was pouring harder now, droplets splashing into puddles, and the wind was making umbrellas wobble like little sails. The two of them noticed each other almost at the same time. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of curiosity crossing both faces. The space under the canopy was tight, barely enough for one person. Yet there they were, standing side by side, both hesitant, both unsure. A moment of silence passed, filled only by the sound of the rain hitting the pavement, until one of them decided to break it. With a playful smile, they said softly, "Is there room for two?" It was just a simple joke, but it caught the other off guard. They looked up, surprised, and then couldn't help laughing. The laugh was unexpected, warm, and it made the first person laugh too, almost without realizing it. "Only if you promise not to steal my coffee," came the reply teasingly, and suddenly the awkwardness of standing under a small canopy vanished. The rain continued to fall, but it no longer seemed gloomy. Instead, it felt like a backdrop to something small and magical, something unplanned. They introduced themselves, not caring about first impressions too much, because the conversation had already begun without formalities. There was a natural ease between them, the kind that usually takes weeks, even months, to develop. Words came easily, flowing like the streams forming on the wet streets around them. They talked about the rain, about how it made the city smell, about favorite coffee flavors, and the worst ones they had tried. Little jokes were exchanged, small observations noted, and each response carried a quiet curiosity about the other. Time passed without either noticing. Minutes stretched into longer minutes as they shared small stories, laughed at minor mishaps in their lives, and commented on strangers hurrying past. The world outside the little shelter seemed chaotic and busy, but here, under this small umbrella, it felt like it was just the two of them. There was a subtle recognition in their eyes, as if they had met before somewhere in another life, or as if the universe had decided to let them collide in this ordinary moment that now felt extraordinary. Eventually, the rain slowed, turning into soft drizzles that made the leaves and streets shimmer. Neither wanted to leave just yet, though. One suggested they step inside the coffee shop to continue talking without being soaked by the remaining rain. Inside, the place was cozy, filled with the smell of roasted beans and sweet pastries. Wooden tables and soft lighting created a warm atmosphere, a sharp contrast to the wet streets outside. They found a corner table, far enough from others to feel private, and sat down. Over steaming cups of coffee and tea, the conversation deepened. They shared small personal details, talking about hobbies, little quirks, and funny experiences that had happened to them in the past. One loved drawing in empty notebooks during quiet moments, while the other enjoyed capturing photographs of things no one noticed, the way light fell on a wet street, the reflection of neon lights and puddles. Each story revealed a little more of who they were, and each laugh built a subtle, invisible bridge connecting them. Hours passed without either realizing it. The coffee shop slowly emptied, the rain stopped completely, and the city outside began to glimmer under the setting sun. Yet they remained immersed in conversation, sharing laughter, and listening with unexpected attentiveness. It was a rare kind of connection, one that usually starts with friendship, but carries the potential for something more. Neither expected to feel it this quickly, yet it was undeniable. The joke at the beginning, "Is there room for two?" now felt like the perfect starting point for something unplanned. something exciting as the evening grew darker. One looked outside and noticed how the city lights reflected on the wet streets. The other followed their gaze and smiled, commenting on how beautiful everything looked when it was wet and shining. There was a comfortable silence, one that was not awkward but intimate, a shared pause where words were not needed. For the first time in a long while, both felt completely at ease, like they had found a tiny pocket of the world where nothing mattered except this moment. Finally, they decided to leave, reluctantly stepping back into the night. The streets were calm now, the earlier chaos of rain replaced by a gentle, cool breeze. They walked side by side for a few steps, neither wanting the conversation to end, but knowing life outside the coffee shop had to continue. A promise was made casually, almost playfully, to meet again soon. It wasn't a dramatic declaration, just a simple agreement that this connection was worth exploring. As they parted ways that night, each carried a warm feeling, a quiet excitement, that this random, rainy encounter had become the start of something memorable. The joke, the laughter, the shared stories, all of it lingered in their minds, a small but meaningful beginning. Neither knew exactly where it would lead, but both sensed that this was the kind of meeting that changes ordinary days into something unforgettable. The city continued to buzz around them, people returning home, lights flickering on in apartments, cars driving by with splashes on wet streets. And somewhere, in the midst of this ordinary urban rhythm, two strangers had found each other in the most unexpected way, connected by a simple question, a shared laugh, and a rainy afternoon that neither would forget. After that rainy afternoon, life seemed to continue as usual for both of them. Yet, underneath the normal routines of work, errands, and quiet evenings at home, each carried the memory of that chance meeting. It was strange how a simple joke, under a canopy, could linger so persistently in the mind, making ordinary moments feel a little lighter. The first person found themselves thinking about that laugh, the spark in the other's eyes, and the way the conversation had flowed so naturally. It was unusual, almost unreal, and yet the memory was comforting. A few days later, a text appeared. On one phone, carefully typed, slightly hesitant, "Would you like to meet for coffee again?" It was simple, direct, but carried a quiet hope. The response came quickly, almost instantly, with a playful tone. "Only if you promise not to spill it on me this time." Both smiled at the words, knowing the conversation would pick up just as easily as before, and it did. That afternoon, they met again in the same cozy coffee shop, the place now feeling familiar, welcoming, almost like a small, safe world carved out of the bustling city. They sat across from each other, ordering drinks and a few pastries to share. The conversation began lightly, with jokes about the weather, the most unusual drinks they had ever tried, and stories of minor disasters in their day-to-day lives. Laughter came easily, warm, and genuine, filling the small space between them. Occasionally, one would glance at the other and catch a thoughtful expression, a smile tucked at the corner of their lips, and it made them feel slightly nervous, in the kind of way that was exciting rather than uncomfortable. As the hours passed, the topics shifted. They talked about their favorite books, movies, and music, each discovery of a shared interest feeling like a small victory. One had recently started learning to play an instrument, while the other had tried painting for the first time in years. They discussed hobbies and quirks in a way that felt intimate, even though they had only known each other for a short time. There was a natural curiosity, a gentle eagerness to understand the other without pressure or expectation. Connection, one that didn't need dramatic gestures to feel meaningful. Outside the window, the city moved on with its usual rhythm. People hurried past, umbrellas bouncing in the wind, cars splashing puddles onto sidewalks. Yet inside, it was quiet, cozy, and warm. Every shared story, every small laugh, every glance added layers to a growing bond. One told a funny story about getting lost on a hiking trail. The other replied with a story about an unexpected encounter with a stray cat that had followed them for blocks. Both laughed until their stomachs hurt, and it felt natural, effortless, like friendship that had existed long before it actually had. As weeks passed, their meetings became regular. They found excuses to see each other, sometimes coffee, sometimes lunch, sometimes just a walk in a nearby park. Each meeting added a new layer to their understanding of one another, they noticed. Little habits, small gestures, the way one would tuck hair behind an ear when nervous, or the other's tendency to fidget with a cup when deep in thought. Each detail felt significant, a thread weaving them closer together. They started sharing more personal stories, ones that were often hard to tell anyone else. One spoke about a childhood memory of climbing trees in the summer. The other listened with rapt attention, asking questions that revealed genuine interest. Another story came about a long-forgotten dream to travel across the country alone, and the conversation turned into an exploration of hopes, fears, and ambitions. There was no rush, no pressure, only a steady unfolding of trust and connection. Occasionally, one would notice how their heart raced a little faster when the other laughed, or how they felt lighter after simply being in their company. It was subtle, slow, and entirely unforced. The joke that had started it all, the one about the tiny umbrella, had transformed into something more profound. Humor remained their bridge, but now it was accompanied by understanding, kindness, and a sense of safety. Each knew that the other genuinely cared, that this connection was built not just on laughter, but on attention and presence. One rainy afternoon, similar to the day they first met, they walked together under a shared umbrella, laughing about how they had both promised never to spill coffee on each other again, only to have one almost do it anyway. The streets were wet, shimmering under the muted gray sky, reflections of lights and puddles creating a quiet, almost magical ambience. They didn't mind the rain. Instead, it felt like part of the story they were writing together. Adding texture and color to their ordinary lives, they began noticing small rituals forming. The first sip of coffee in the morning became a shared thought, a message sent to each other with a simple thinking of you. Evenings included casual calls that stretched longer than planned, with soft laughter and gentle teasing. Friends around them began to notice the subtle glow in their demeanor, the way their conversations often ended in smiles and lingering thoughts. There was something undeniably special growing between them, quiet yet persistent, like a flame that needed no grand gesture to exist. One day, sitting in the park on a bench, surrounded by autumn leaves, they shared a moment of silence. Watching children play and dogs run through the fallen foliage, the wind was crisp, carrying with it the smell of wet leaves and earth. Neither spoke immediately, content to simply be in each other's presence. Finally, one whispered about how strange and wonderful it was to meet someone so unexpectedly, someone who had become a part of their daily thoughts in such a short time. The other nodded, smiling softly, knowing exactly what was meant without needing words. The bond continued to strengthen through small, ordinary acts. A message to check if the other had eaten lunch, an unexpected gift of a favorite pastry. A shared joke about a common annoyance. Each action built a quiet, steady foundation of affection. Neither rushed anything, understanding that the best connections grew naturally with patience and attention. The initial spark of humor had matured into mutual respect, care, and a growing sense of reliance on one another for emotional comfort. There were moments of vulnerability as well. One night after a long day, one confessed fears about the future and uncertainties about personal goals. The other listened without judgment, offering gentle words of encouragement and support. It was the kind of exchange that deepened trust, showing that their relationship wasn't just about fun and laughter, but about being present for each other through difficulties. These moments, though quiet and simple, became the true markers of their growing closeness. Evenings often ended with long walks under the city lights, talking about everything from dreams to small observations about the world. Each conversation revealed more of their personalities, values, and priorities. They laughed at each other's quirks, encouraged each other's passions, and sometimes sat in silence, comfortable with the shared presence. The simplicity of these moments made them feel genuine, authentic, and deeply human, as weeks turned into months. It became clear that their connection had moved beyond the initial playful spark. They were no longer just two strangers who had met by chance. They had become companions in the truest sense, people who noticed each other's moods, celebrated small victories, and offered comfort during setbacks. The humor that brought them together remained, but it was now intertwined with a growing affection and understanding that, words could barely capture. The joke that had started everything, "Is there room for two?" was no longer just a line. It was a symbol of their journey, a reminder that connection could begin in the simplest, most unexpected ways. Each interaction, each shared story, and each quiet moment reinforced the idea that something meaningful was unfolding, slowly but surely, and neither of them wanted it to end. After several months of laughter, shared coffee, and quiet walks, life seemed to have settled into a comfortable rhythm for both of them. Every day held little moments that reminded them of each other: a text to ask about lunch, a playful message about a small mistake, or a photo of something that had caught their attention. Their bond had grown slowly, steadily, like a tree forming deep roots underground. Hidden from the casual observer, but strong and resilient yet. As life often does, it brought an unexpected twist. A small misunderstanding that neither of them had anticipated. One evening, while scrolling through messages, one noticed a brief, ambiguous text sent by the other to a friend. It was casual, almost offhand, but in that moment, it triggered a pang of doubt. The mind raced, filling in gaps with assumptions, imagining scenarios that were unlikely but emotionally convincing. The warmth that had been constant suddenly felt a little uncertain. The other person, unaware of this small seed of doubt, continued their evening as usual. They were focused on a project they had been working on, lost in concentration, completely oblivious to the silent worry building on the other side. Hours passed, and eventually, the tension could not be ignored. One finally sent a text, trying to sound calm but betraying a subtle hint of anxiety. "I saw your message earlier. Can we talk?" The response came quickly, with genuine concern. "Of course. What's wrong?" And just like that, the first real challenge in their relationship had begun. They decided to meet the next day, choosing a quiet park as their meeting place. The park was familiar, one of their favorite spots, where golden light filtered through the trees and the soft rustling of leaves made even a difficult conversation feel slightly less heavy when they arrived. There was a noticeable tension, a quiet pause that neither could break immediately. Sitting on the same bench where they had once shared a peaceful afternoon, they looked at each other, searching for the right words. The one who had been anxious began, voice trembling slightly. "I saw your message, and I don't know, it just made me feel a little unsure." The other listened carefully, nodding slowly, realizing immediately what had caused the misunderstanding. "I understand," came the reply softly. "I didn't mean for it to seem like anything. And I can see how it might have looked that way. I should have been clearer." There was a long pause, where both of them just breathed, letting the words settle. It was uncomfortable, yes, but not unbearable. They had built a foundation strong enough to allow honesty, even when it might sting. Slowly, the conversation unfolded, careful and deliberate. They talked about feelings, about assumptions, and about the way misunderstandings could grow if left unspoken. There was no blame, no harsh words, only a shared desire to understand each other better. As they spoke, the tension began to fade, replaced by a quiet relief. They realized that this was a moment not of failure, but of growth, a chance to strengthen the trust that had been forming so naturally. The one who had felt anxious admitted, "I guess I just got nervous. I care about this, about you, and I didn't want to imagine something that wasn't true." The other reached out, a gentle touch on a hand, reassuring without words. "I care too, and I want us to be able to say anything, even the uncomfortable things. That's how we'll stay strong." The conversation continued, moving from the immediate misunderstanding to deeper thoughts about communication, expectations, and personal insecurities. They shared fears they had never spoken aloud before: the fear of being misunderstood, of losing someone they valued, and of stepping into vulnerability. Each confession was met with patience, with attentiveness, and with gentle reassurance. It was a delicate dance, where both were learning how to navigate emotions without causing harm. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the park in shades of gold and pink, they felt a renewed sense of connection. The misunderstanding had not only been resolved, but it opened a door to a deeper intimacy. They realized that love was not only about shared laughter and joy, but also about facing challenges together, about honesty, patience, and the willingness to see the other's perspective. Walking home together, the air was cool but refreshing. The streets were quieter now, street lights reflecting softly on the wet pavement from a brief drizzle that had passed. They talked lightly again, about the small wonders of the day, about clouds that looked like different shapes, and the way light fell on building windows. It was as if they had returned to their familiar rhythm, but now it carried a subtle new depth. Every laugh felt warmer, every smile felt more sincere, and every shared glance held a quiet acknowledgement of what they had just navigated together. Over the next few weeks, this experience became a reference point in their growing relationship. It reminded them both that misunderstandings could happen, that emotions could be messy, but that trust and communication could repair and even strengthen a bond. Small gestures of reassurance became more frequent short messages to check in, unexpected calls just to say good morning, and shared stories about little triumphs and failures alike. Each interaction was now layered with a gentle understanding, a silent promise that they would face challenges together rather than letting them fester in silence. They continued exploring life side by side, finding comfort in shared routines and spontaneity alike. Weekends were spent in parks, at small cafes, or simply walking the streets, noticing the unnoticed details of their city. One would point out a bird perched on a lamppost. The other would notice the pattern of leaves blown across the pavement. Their laughter remained, but it was now interwoven with subtle touches of care and attention. They began to understand each other's moods without needing words, offering support when one felt tired or stressed, and celebrating the small victories together. One evening, sitting by the riverside, with the golden light reflecting on gentle ripples, they talked about the future not in a pressured way, but with curiosity and openness. They discussed dreams, places they wanted to visit, and the kind of life they hoped to build. The conversation was light at times, serious at others, but always carried a sense of partnership. Each felt seen, understood, and valued. The trust they had built through the earlier misunderstanding now allowed them to speak freely. Without fear of judgment or misinterpretation, the challenge they had faced became a turning point in their story. They understood that real connections were not only formed in moments of joy, but also tested in moments of uncertainty. The ability to confront discomfort with honesty and patience had deepened their bond in ways that laughter alone could never have achieved. They began to realize that love was not just a feeling, but a commitment to presence, empathy, and care. In the quiet of late nights, when one would send a simple message checking if the other had reached home safely, there was a warmth that had grown from those difficult conversations. The small reassurance of attention and concern became a language of its own, a silent acknowledgement that they were not just companions, but a source of comfort and support. The humor that had brought them together was still there, but now it was strengthened by understanding, respect, and shared experience. The days that followed were filled with ordinary moments that now felt extraordinary. A walk in the park, sharing a pastry from a favorite cafe, laughing at an unexpected street performance. Each moment carried subtle significance. They were learning to cherish the everyday, to see beauty in simplicity, and to find joy not only in excitement, but also in presence. The first challenge had shown them that love required attention, care, and willingness to face discomfort, and they embraced it fully. Months had passed since the first misunderstanding, and in that time, their bond had grown steadily, quietly but with an undeniable depth. Life was full of ordinary routines, work, errands, evenings spent reading or walking, but these routines had taken on a new glow. Everything felt a little brighter, a little lighter, because of the knowledge that they had someone who understood them so completely. Laughter was still frequent, but now it was accompanied by glances and touches that carried unspoken warmth. Small signs of affection that grew bolder with each passing day. One weekend, they decided to take a short trip to a nearby town, a place neither had visited before. It was not planned for any particular reason. It was simply a spontaneous choice, driven by the desire to spend time together, away from the usual city crowd. The morning air was crisp, carrying a freshness that made their journey feel like a small adventure. They walked together to the train station, sharing playful arguments about who had packed the better snacks, and laughing so freely that strangers passing by might have thought they had been lifelong companions. The train ride was filled with soft conversations, the kind that meander from one topic to another without any sense of urgency. They talked about dreams, memories from childhood, and small everyday annoyances that somehow became humorous when shared. The scenery outside the window changed gradually, from the familiar urban landscape to stretches of green fields dotted with trees and flowers swaying gently in the breeze. Each glance at the other brought a quiet awareness, a subtle acknowledgement that this day felt different, special in a way that neither had expected. Arriving at the small town, they began to explore its streets, narrow and cobblestoned, lined with little shops, cafes, and stalls selling handmade crafts. There was no strict plan, no rush to see everything. Instead, they moved slowly, taking in the sights, sounds, and smells. One pointed out a small gallery tucked between two old buildings, and they wandered inside, appreciating paintings that captured quiet landscapes and fleeting moments of life. They laughed at the titles of some art pieces, shared opinions about the colors, and even tried to imagine the stories behind each creation as they walked along the river that ran through the town. The sunlight reflecting off the water created shimmering patterns that danced across their faces. They paused to sit on a low stone wall, watching ducks glide gracefully across the surface. One nudged the other playfully, teasing about the seriousness with which they watched the birds. Both laughed, but the laughter carried a softness, a lingering warmth, as if every shared moment was gradually weaving their hearts closer together. During the afternoon, they found a small cafe overlooking the river. The tables were outside, under umbrellas that fluttered lightly in the breeze. They ordered tea and pastries, and as they sat together, there was a comfortable silence, punctuated by occasional comments about the view. At one point, I looked at the other, noticing the way the sunlight caught in their hair, the way their eyes lit up when they smiled. It was a subtle moment, but it carried a weight neither could ignore. The heart seemed to recognize something before the mind could fully name it. They continued exploring the town, visiting a small bookstore, stopping to watch street musicians, and occasionally holding hands without realizing it. Each contact felt natural, effortless, and meaningful, an unspoken acknowledgement that their connection was evolving. There were small jokes and playful teasing, as always. But now, they were mixed with glances and touches that carried a quiet intimacy. They began to notice how much they missed each other during brief moments apart, how a simple text or call could bring a smile that lasted the rest of the day. As the day turned to evening, they found themselves on a small hill overlooking the town. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, fading into soft purples as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. They sat side by side, shoulders brushing lightly, sharing a quiet moment that neither wanted to break. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of flowers and freshly baked bread from nearby shops. One spoke softly about how beautiful the town looked from this height, and the other nodded, eyes still fixed on the horizon. In that moment, a realization quietly settled over both of them. It was not a sudden dramatic confession, but a gentle understanding that something had shifted. What had started as playful curiosity, laughter, and friendship had grown into a deeper feeling, one that was tender, patient, and entirely unforced. There was a nervous awareness, a fluttering of the heart, but it was accompanied by comfort, a sense that this feeling was mutual. Even if unspoken, the walk back to the train station was filled with a quiet energy. They spoke less, not from lack of words, but from the weight of what they now felt. Small touches, fingers brushing, arms lightly pressing together, spoke volumes. Each laugh, each glance carried a subtle significance, a growing acknowledgement of the love that had begun to bloom quietly between them. Even the playful teasing continued, now tinged with warmth and affection, as if every joke also carried an undercurrent of care. On the train ride home, the city lights appeared gradually, flickering in the darkness like tiny stars. They sat side by side, occasionally sharing small observations about the lights, the reflections in the windows, or the quiet hum of the train. It was in these simple, ordinary moments that the depth of their connection became most evident. They didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Presence, attention, and shared experience had created a love that was steady, patient, and real. In the following weeks, the small, quiet realization of their growing love began to manifest in everyday life. Messages became more personal, checking in not just about plans, but about feelings and moods. Walks through the park felt different, their hands seeking each other naturally, fingers intertwining without thought. Small surprises, favorite snacks, thoughtful notes, or gentle reminders to rest became ways to express care and attention. Each act reinforced the understanding that their relationship was evolving, moving beyond friendship into something deeper and more enduring. They began talking more openly about what they wanted for the future, not in a pressured or formal way, but with curiosity and honesty. Dreams were shared, ambitions discussed, and hopes quietly revealed. There was no rush, no urgency, only a gentle unfolding of trust and openness. Each conversation, each shared moment brought them closer together, reinforcing the subtle but undeniable shift in their feelings. One evening, after a long day of work, they met for a quiet dinner at a small restaurant they both loved. The conversation flowed easily, laughter punctuating moments of reflection. At one point, I reached across the table, gently brushing a stray strand of hair from the other's face. The touch lingered, quiet and tender, and for a moment, neither spoke. Eyes met, and in that gaze was a silent understanding, a recognition of the love that had been growing steadily. Patiently, almost imperceptibly, until now it was impossible to ignore. After dinner, they walked together under the soft glow of streetlights. The night was calm, the air carrying a gentle chill that made them huddle slightly closer. Each step, each laugh, each quiet word reinforced the feeling that their relationship had transformed. Playfulness remained, humor still bridged gaps. But now it was intertwined with care, affection, and a deep, growing love. The joke that had brought them together months ago had evolved into something real, meaningful, and quietly profound. By the time they reached their usual parting spot, neither wanted to let go. There was a pause, a lingering moment where silence spoke louder than words. Finally, one spoke softly. "I feel something has changed between us." The other nodded, a small, genuine smile spreading across their face. "I feel it too." It was not dramatic, not rushed, but it carried the weight of truth. They had crossed an invisible line, moving from friendship into a love that was tender, steady, and fully human. As they parted that night, walking to separate homes, the city around them seemed quieter, gentler, as if it, too, acknowledged the subtle transformation in their relationship. Both carried a quiet warmth, a gentle excitement, and a sense of peace that came from knowing that this bond, built on laughter, understanding, and patience, had now become something deeper. The turning point had arrived, not in a dramatic confession, but in shared moments, unspoken recognition, and the natural evolution of their hearts. From that day onward, everything between them shifted subtly but meaningfully. Ordinary routines became richer, simple conversations carried new depth, and every shared glance, every touch, and every laugh became a reminder of the love that had quietly, patiently grown. They were no longer just companions. They were partners, friends, and confidants, discovering together that the best kind of love often begins quietly, blooms slowly, and becomes extraordinary in the simplicity of shared life. Time passed, and their connection only grew stronger, evolving naturally through shared experiences, laughter, and small gestures of care. What had started as a joke on a rainy afternoon had transformed into a bond that was tender, patient, and steady. Every day carried reminders of their affection for one another, thoughtful message in the morning, a shared coffee during a busy afternoon, or a quiet walk in the evening that turned into hours of conversation. They no longer needed to speak of feelings explicitly. The subtle language of presence, attentiveness, a shared joy had already made their hearts understood. They began to create small routines together. Weekend walks in the park became a habit, where they would pause to watch children play, admire flowers, or simply sit quietly, content with each other's company. Even ordinary moments, like grocery shopping or running errands, turned into opportunities for connection. They laughed at small mishaps. A spilled bag of apples, a lost umbrella, and these moments only drew them closer. The world seemed warmer, softer, and infinitely more interesting when experienced together. One afternoon, they decided to revisit the coffee shop where it all had begun. The familiar scent of roasted beans, the gentle murmur of conversation, and the soft lighting created a comforting atmosphere. They chose a corner table, the same one they had often gravitated toward, and settled in with steaming drinks. Conversation flowed easily, touching on memories of their first meeting, the rainy afternoon that had sparked their initial connection, and the small adventures they had shared since then. Both laughed freely, recalling the playful joke that had brought them together and marveling at how far their bond had grown since that day. During their time at the coffee shop, they noticed the little ways they had changed each other's lives. One remembered how the other had encouraged them to pursue a hobby they had long neglected, while the other recalled the first person's gentle advice during a difficult moment that had provided unexpected clarity. These reflections were quiet, subtle acknowledgments, but they carried deep meaning. Each realized that love was not only about shared joy, but also about support, encouragement, and growth, the ability to lift each other up and celebrate who they were becoming together. As evening approached, they left the coffee shop and wandered through the city streets, bathed in the warm glow of streetlights. The night was calm, carrying a soft breeze that made the air feel alive with possibility. They walked side by side, occasionally brushing shoulders, sometimes holding hands without thought, and every gesture carried a silent understanding of mutual care. Each step felt purposeful, yet effortless, as if life itself had guided them together, making every small choice lead to these shared moments. Over the following weeks, their bond deepened in ways both ordinary and profound. Quiet nights spent talking, spontaneous day trips to the countryside, and long walks along familiar streets became the rhythm of their connection. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, offering comfort when one felt overwhelmed and celebrating achievements, big or small, with genuine excitement. Humor remained an essential part of their relationship, but it was now layered with subtle affection, teasing that hinted at a deeper bond, and laughter that reflected the safety and trust they had built. They also discovered the importance of facing life's small challenges together. When one experienced a stressful day at work or a personal setback, the other offered a steady presence, listening without judgment and providing gentle reassurance. These moments reinforced the trust and intimacy between them, proving that their relationship was not only about joy, but also about resilience, empathy, and unwavering support. They realized that love was as much about being present in difficult times as it was about celebrating the good ones. One rainy evening, reminiscent of the day they first met, they found themselves huddled under a shared umbrella, walking along the quiet streets. The rain fell softly, creating a rhythmic backdrop to their conversation. One looked at the other, noticing how the streetlights reflected in their eyes, and felt a quiet surge of emotion. Without words, they reached for each other's hand, fingers intertwining naturally. The gesture carried the weight of months of shared experiences, laughter, and small acts of care. It was a silent acknowledgement of the love that had grown steadily, patiently, and completely. The next morning, one surprised the other with a small, thoughtful gesture, a handwritten note tucked into a bag, simply saying, "You make ordinary days feel extraordinary." The other smiled, touched by the simplicity and sincerity of the message. Such small acts became frequent markers of their affection. Whether it was sharing a favorite pastry, sending a message to check on the other's day, or quietly listening without interruption, each gesture reinforced the connection they had nurtured over time. As their relationship matured, they began talking about the future not with pressure or expectation, but with curiosity, openness, and honesty. They discussed dreams, hopes, and the kind of life they wanted to build together. These conversations were gentle, reflective, and full of possibility. Each conversation revealed a deeper understanding of the other's values, desires, and fears. They learned to navigate disagreements with patience and empathy, recognizing that differences did not weaken their bond, but provided opportunities for growth and compromise. One evening, sitting on a quiet hill overlooking the city lights, they shared a long, comfortable silence. The world seemed to pause around them, the hum of traffic and distant voices fading into the background. In that silence, there was a profound understanding that words could not fully capture. They felt a shared sense of belonging, safety, and anticipation for the life unfolding before them. The playful joke that had brought them together months ago had evolved into a profound love, steady and enduring, built on trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect. In the months that followed, they continued to explore life together, embracing both adventure and quiet moments. Weekend trips, late-night conversations, simple walks through familiar streets became the foundation of their shared story. They celebrated milestones, no matter how small, with genuine joy, and offered support during challenges with unwavering presence. Each moment reinforced the depth and authenticity of their bond, proving that love could be both extraordinary and grounded in the simple pleasures of daily life. They also found joy in shared routines, simple habits that strengthened their connection. Morning coffees became rituals of warmth and presence. Messages exchanged throughout the day, whether playful or caring, reminded each of them that they were thought of and valued. Even minor disagreements were approached with patience and empathy, turning potential conflicts into opportunities for understanding and growth. Through these small but consistent actions, they built a love that was resilient, grounded, and profoundly human. As the story reached its natural rhythm, it became clear that what had started as a joke, "Is there room for two?" had blossomed into something far greater than either could have imagined. It was no longer just a chance meeting on a rainy afternoon. It was a relationship built on laughter, trust, understanding, and care. The joke had been the spark, but it was the shared experiences, the attentiveness, and the quiet moments of presence that had transformed it into lasting love. One night, as they walked home together under the soft glow of streetlights, the city quiet and serene, they paused to look at the stars. The sky was clear, scattered with tiny points of light, and in that moment, the enormity of their journey together felt present. They held hands, fingers intertwined, and shared a smile that spoke volumes. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic gestures. The love they had cultivated over months, in laughter, in support, and in shared silence, was enough. It was steady, patient, and enduring, the kind of love that carries quietly but powerfully through life. They continued to build their life together, embracing both the extraordinary and the mundane. Ordinary days were filled with small joys, playful jokes, and quiet companionship. Adventures, both planned and spontaneous, became memories etched into their shared story. They learned that love was not only found in dramatic moments but was nurtured in everyday life, in attentiveness, care, and shared laughter. Looking back, both realized that their journey had been shaped by chance, humor, and openness to connection. The rainy afternoon that had begun with a simple joke had set the stage for a relationship that was deep, meaningful, and enduring. They had discovered that love could grow quietly, patiently, and steadily, and that it could transform ordinary moments into something extraordinary. As the final chapter of their story unfolded, they remained side by side, walking through life with hands entwined, hearts open, and laughter ready for the next small adventure. Their love was a testament to the power of chance, honesty, care, and shared experiences. What had started with a playful question had grown into a profound, lasting connection, proof that sometimes the simplest moments could lead to the most extraordinary love stories. And so, their story continued, not with grand finales or dramatic conclusions, but with quiet confidence, steady love, and the deep knowledge that they had found something rare, beautiful, and enduring. A love that began with laughter had grown into a life shared, a bond strengthened, and a journey taken together, proof that sometimes All it takes is a little space under an umbrella, a simple joke, and a willingness to see where life might lead. Life had taken on a rhythm that felt both comforting and exciting. Their days were no longer just routines. They were filled with shared moments that carried meaning in ways neither had expected. Ordinary mornings were brightened by a simple message, a playful comment, or a shared cup of coffee. Even the quiet evenings at home had a different kind of warmth, one that came from knowing that someone truly understood you, someone who had become an inseparable part of your thoughts, your plans, and your heart. One weekend, they decided to explore a small village a few hours away from the city. It was a spontaneous choice, inspired by the desire to escape the familiar and experience something new together. The journey began early in the morning, with the streets still quiet and the air carrying the freshness of dawn. They packed lightly, carrying essentials and a few snacks for the road, and joked along the way about whose playlist would be the soundtrack of the trip. The laughter that filled the car was warm and easy, the kind that comes from deep familiarity and shared comfort. During the drive, the conversation meandered from serious to playful, touching on everything from favorite books to dreams that had been long forgotten. One spoke of a childhood memory of climbing a hill just to watch the sunset, while the other shared a story about learning to ride a bicycle in the rain and failing spectacularly. Both laughed until their sides ached, enjoying not only the stories themselves, but also the way the other reacted to them. There was a quiet magic in these exchanges, a sense that each moment added another layer to their growing bond. When they arrived at the village, the streets were narrow and lined with stone houses, each with small gardens spilling over with flowers. The sun was higher now, casting a warm glow over everything. They wandered slowly, exploring shops filled with handmade crafts, tasting local delicacies, and pausing to admire the views from small bridges over gentle streams. Every discovery was shared with quiet delight, and even small mishaps, like dropping a pastry or getting slightly lost, became sources of laughter rather than frustration. They stopped at a small riverside cafe for lunch, choosing a table where they could watch the water flow by. The conversation turned reflective, more serious than usual. They spoke about what mattered most to them in life, the importance of honesty, the desire to grow, and the need to surround themselves with people who genuinely cared. Each word carried weight, not because it was dramatic, but because it came from a place of sincerity. There was a trust between them now that allowed for openness without fear, a comfort that only comes from months of shared experiences and quiet understanding. After lunch, they decided to take a small hike to a hill overlooking the village. The path was uneven and winding, but they moved together, sometimes holding hands, sometimes helping each other over rocks or slippery patches. The physical closeness, combined with the shared effort, created a sense of intimacy that was gentle but undeniable. They spoke less, letting the scenery, the soft rustle of leaves, and the occasional bird song fill the spaces between words. There was a quiet acknowledgement in every glance, every touch, and every step that this connection was something rare and beautiful. Reaching the top of the hill, they paused to sit on a large rock, breathing in the crisp air and enjoying the panoramic view. The village looked like a painting below them, roofs glowing in the sunlight, tiny figures moving through the streets, and the river glinting like silver. One reached over to adjust the other's scarf, and in that simple gesture, there was a depth of care that words could not capture. They sat in silence for a while, watching the world below and feeling the steady presence of each other. In that quiet, both realized how much they had come to mean to one another, not just as friends, but as companions in life, in thought, and in heart. The hike down was slower, more playful. They ran briefly across a small clearing, laughing like children, their voices echoing through the trees. A small stumble led to gentle teasing, and soon they were both laughing uncontrollably, holding on to each other to regain balance. Even the simple act of walking, of moving through the landscape together, felt rich and meaningful. Every touch, every shared glance, and every burst of laughter reinforced the growing affection that had been building for months. Back in the village square, they found a small art gallery tucked between two old buildings. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paint and varnish. They wandered among paintings and sculptures, sharing thoughts and impressions. One pointed out a painting of a river at sunset, commenting on how the light captured a sense of calm and wonder. The other nodded, adding a story of a similar river they had seen as a child. These exchanges, though simple, carried a quiet intimacy, revealing not only their thoughts but also the way they noticed and valued the perspectives of each other as the afternoon faded into evening. They stopped at a small bakery to pick up some fresh bread and pastries for the journey home. The baker smiled at them, recognizing their warmth and easy camaraderie, and offered a small loaf on the house. They thanked the baker and continued walking through the village streets, the lights softening to a golden hue. Even the mundane act of carrying pastries felt like part of an ongoing adventure. When shared together, the ride back to the city was quieter, filled with the gentle hum of the engine and soft music from the playlist they had agreed upon earlier. Both felt a sense of contentment that was difficult to put into words, a feeling of having spent a day fully present, experiencing life together, and deepening a bond that had grown quietly over months. One reached over to hold the other's hand across the seat. A simple gesture, but it carried the weight of months of laughter, trust, and shared care. In the following weeks, the patterns of daily life continued, but each routine now had subtle significance. Texts were sent not out of obligation but to share small thoughts, photos of something interesting, or playful comments about the day. Even brief phone calls became moments to connect, laugh, and share. There was a steady presence, a comforting rhythm that both had come to rely on. Each small act, no matter how ordinary, reinforced the depth of their connection.